Well, welcome back to our continued session on beauty. Beauty is Theophany. At this point, we've kind of done some setup with some of the ancient philosophy, Plato's theory of the forms, and how that plays into the conception of beauty. Talked a little about the symposium, the ascent to beauty, the soul's longing for beauty, how even when we saw Plotinus, beauty as form, as a certain kind of shape, a certain intelligible character from God that sort of displays itself in our world. And we've looked at some modern thinkers like Freud, who thinks quite the opposite, that any sort of transcendent longing for beauty is really just some kind of erotic repression working itself out in certain ways. We've also looked at Friedrich Nietzsche, the will to power, a sort of conception of the world as essentially driven by power dynamics of some sort, and that the Christian story of weakness and humility is an inversion of the real structure of reality. So that, for example, what beauty should be is a kind of vitality, again, the sort of the blonde beast of prey, the sort of Viking slaughtering, the weak lamb, and that Christianity has essentially, by picking up on this Jewish roots, to say, oh, actually, it's good to be weak, it's beautiful to be weak, and therefore they've sort of subverted the normal dynamic, as opposed to what we saw with Christ, the sort of the body brought to rot, where it really is in weakness, in our own dying flesh, to borrow from Father Silvio Bunta, that the glory of God shines forth. And that is what is the beauty. The beauty is the beholding of the glory of God. Today, we look at St. Dionysius the Areopagite, because in the Divine Names, chapter 4, there's this really kind of sustained treatment of the concept of beauty that I think is kind of perfect in terms of finding one spot that really treats it at length. And he talks about beauty and goodness and unity and ecstasy, which we'll see. And so now we're finally turning to, if last time we kind of looked at Christ, the Christian, the scriptural story of beauty, now we're looking at some of the Holy Fathers, St. Dionysius being a sort of appropriate choice. And per usual, I've just chosen a ton of quotes. Now, my preferred way of doing Dionysius is, I wish I could do like a whole semester on him, frankly, because there's so much setup that I think is needed to really, he's a very rich thinker, but a very difficult thinker to read, particularly because not only, at least if now Vladika Alexander is to be trusted, writing for monks, a monk writing to monks in probably 5th century Syria, 5th, 6th century Syria, but also very obviously influenced by Proclus, one of the last great Neoplatonic philosophers of that same era. And then, of course, deeply scriptural. Deeply, obviously, Judeo-Christian in the sense of using all of the temple imagery, the Sinai imagery, the Theophany imagery to construct his experience of God, and liturgical imagery. So, in one sense, Dionysius takes a lot of setup. I hope that I'll make some brief comments on some of his, sources so we can better understand him. But hopefully, just by looking at some of these passages together, he can still speak for himself. One of the first things I will say, this sort of bit on your handout, remaining procession reversion, is this metaphysical structure that Dionysius adopts from Proclus. And it's a causal structure, and I want to take just 1 minute to explain what's going on here. So as Platonism begins to develop its more sort of nuanced account of causation, which the question would be, how exactly do the paradigmatic forms, or as we might say, the ideas in the mind of God, serve as causes of the things in the world? Because there does seem to be at least this initial problem where if you say something like, well, there are these transcendent ideas in God, which all these things participate in, well, they seem to be somewhere else. They seem to be doing something else somewhere else. And so how exactly are they causing these things on the ground? How is it exactly that this cat, my cat, is a manifestation, an individual form of this great divine paradigm. And so late Neoplatonism comes up with this three-part structure. There's a lot of threes in late antique philosophy and theology, but this is the gist. In any causal act, there is three major movements. There is remaining, procession, and return. And now, this is not necessarily like a linear process, as if step one, I remain, step two, I process, step two, I return. It's really a kind of logical structure of the relationship between a cause and its effect. And what Proclus in particular has in mind is, imagine me in front of a mirror. And there's some part, like I cause my reflection in some way, right? I would say in this case, I intentionally stand before the mirror. Of course, I don't have control over the light and all these other factors, but for the sake of the analogy, I stand before the mirror, I'm projecting a part of my being out into the world. Nonetheless, I'm not undergoing any change. Like nothing is happening to me by giving my image to the mirror. And so in this case, remaining stands for the idea that the cause, when it causes, doesn't necessarily lose anything of itself. Doesn't undergo some kind of decay or something like this when it causes something else. The procession is what I've already spoken about, this giving myself, giving the image, my image to something. And so there is something going out of me. So though I'm not changing, there is something that is being given. And then reversion or return is the receptivity of the thing that's doing the receiving. So it's a very active structure. So where we might think like cause and effect is often sort of not inert, but certainly lacking that kind of dynamism. It's like the cause is everything, it causes something, there's an effect, the effect just does its thing. Here, reversion entails some kind of like active participation on the part of the thing that's receiving the image. So I am the agent, I give a bit of myself to the mirror. I don't undergo any change in doing so. And then the mirror receives that image and reflects it back to me. And that three-part is simultaneous. And so what Dionysius is going to do is he adopts this to start speaking about the structure of God's causation of the world, of the cosmos. And so we can already start to see how this could work, right? God, the cause of all, causes the world without any change. He doesn't go any decay or diminution or anything like this. He, of course, gives something of himself. He processes out of himself, and Dionysius likes this word in Greek for procession a lot. These processions of God. And yet, we'll see a lot in Dionysius, the creature that's being caused, that receives the power, the image, or whatever, somehow participates in its own coming to be, in its own existence. There's a kind of free acceptance of being caused. And so we'll see how that works here shortly. So the very first passage out of Divine Names, I'll just do 4.1, but you have the more precise citation there. So he says, their longing for the good makes them what they are and confers on them their well-being. Shaped by what they yearn for, they exemplify goodness. And as the law of God requires of them, they share with those below them the good gifts which have come their way. So already you have the good doing this causing, but notice even from the beginning, their longing for the good makes them what they are. So Dionysius is getting to this idea in terms of reversion, the sort of turning back to your cause and actively accepting what it gives to you, is part of the structure of your own being, part of what it means to be you, this active participation in God. And so you might say, first and foremost, what makes us exist for Dionysius is desire. Desire to return, to revert, to accept, to participate in the good, which is our cause. And as we do that more and more, we become more active in that receptivity, we achieve well-being, we achieve perfection. And so, again, shaped by what they yearn for, and we'll see here very shortly, by yearning, the Greek here is a version of eros, their erotic turn, they exemplify goodness, right? Now, it doesn't end there. So we turn, part of our coming to be is this kind of desire, like the fundamental feature of what it means to exist is to desire God. And then we don't stop. As we turn back to God and receive the good, we exemplify that goodness, and this is key for Dionysius' understanding of hierarchy, and he's the one who makes up this term. So the term hierarchy doesn't exist until Dionysius. Then you want to share goodness. And so as you exemplify it more, you turn and bestow those gifts onto others. And so the same remaining procession return happens down the hierarchy. And so there's a kind of fecundity here, that as you participate in the good, you receive the good gifts from God, you're filled up, you're perfected, you exemplify that goodness, you're a mirror. Recall Gregory of Nyssa's imagery of mirrors and mirrors, mirrors of mirrors. And then you want to keep on sharing, and then you turn and you do the remaining procession return, and then that thing turns upon its cause, receives, turns back, and continues this sort of process of generosity.